That night, the gun sat on the table between Silas Thorne and everything he'd been trying to forget. He'd taken it apart 6 times that week, put it back together 5. The 6th time, his hands shook too badly to finish, and he'd left it there in pieces, a puzzle he couldn't solve anymore. The hands that had saved 43 men in Kandahar couldn't even hold a coffee cup steady now. Couldn't tie his boots without the laces slipping through trembling fingers. Couldn't do much of anything except count the ways he'd failed the 11 soldiers who died on his operating table, while mortars fell and blood pooled faster than he could stop it. But on this particular night, in a cabin buried deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains where nobody came looking and nobody asked questions, something changed. A wild bobcat with half an ear missing started clawing at his door like the world was ending. And maybe it was, because 10 miles into a blizzard, at the bottom of an illegal bear trap, there was a 10-year-old girl dying in the snow. She was holding a wooden box like it was the only thing keeping her heart beating. Inside that box were photographs and medical records, and a handwritten ledger containing 47 names. 47 people who died slowly from poisoned water, while the people responsible buried the evidence, and anyone who tried to expose it. What Silas didn't know yet, what would break him worse than any war ever had, was that this child clutching evidence of mass murder was the daughter of the man whose death had destroyed him 15 years ago. The man who'd bled out in Somalia while Silas's shaking hands tried desperately to save him. The man who'd made Silas promise to protect his family if anything ever happened. And now, they were coming. The sheriff, the deputy, the people who'd already killed this girl's parents and 7-year-old sister, coming to finish what they'd started, coming to make sure that box and everyone who knew what was inside it disappeared into the mountain snow and never came back. All that stood between a child and certain death was a broken doctor who couldn't even hold a gun steady and a wild animal who'd chosen, for reasons nobody could explain, to care whether either of them survived the night. This is the story of how they saved each other, and how sometimes redemption comes with claws and teeth and a price written in blood on frozen ground. The cabin sat crooked against the ridgeline like a bad tooth. Silas Thorne had stopped noticing the tilt years ago, same way he'd stopped noticing the smell of old whiskey soaked into the floorboards, or the draft that came through the north wall every winter. What he couldn't stop noticing was the silence. Not the good kind. The kind that pressed down on your chest at 3 in the morning when sleep wouldn't come. And the memories did. Jasper was out there somewhere in the dark. The Bobcat came and went as he pleased, which was the whole point. Silas never fed him on a schedule, never tried to keep him close. That's not how it worked between them. The cat had shown up 2 winters back with half an ear missing and a limp that said he'd lost a fight badly. Silas had left scraps on the porch. Jasper had stayed in the tree line for 3 weeks before he got close enough to take them while Silas watched. Now the damn cat slept under the porch most nights. Silas told himself it was just shelter, just convenience. Animals didn't attach. That was human nonsense. The Remington sat on the kitchen table where it had been sitting for 6 days. Silas walked past it 4, maybe 5 times a day, sometimes more. He'd taken it apart twice, cleaned it, put it back together. His hands shook less when he was working on something. That was the problem with being a surgeon. Your hands remembered what they used to do, even when your head couldn't stand the weight of it. He'd saved 43 men in Kandahar. Give or take, he'd lost 11. Those numbers should balance out different than they did. Mathematics didn't care about the screaming, or the smell, or the fact that 3 of those 11 had been kids. Not children, just kids. 19, 20 years old. Young enough that their mothers' voices probably still echoed in their heads when the mortars came in. Silas poured another drink. The bottle was already half gone, and it was only Tuesday. Or Wednesday. He'd stopped tracking days the same way he'd stopped answering the phone. The landline still worked, but it just rang into nothing. Sometimes he wondered if anyone even tried anymore. The wind picked up outside, moving through the pines with that low sound that wasn't quite a whistle, but wasn't quite a moan either. Winter was coming early this year. He could feel it in his bad knee, the one that had taken shrapnel outside Kabul. The weather didn't care what you'd done or hadn't done. It just came. Jasper appeared at the window. Not appeared. He'd been there. Silas just hadn't noticed until the cat's eyes caught the lamplight and threw it back green and cold. The bobcat was staring at something past the cabin, ears forward, body absolutely still in that way predators got when they were deciding whether to kill something or run from it. Silas stood up too fast, and the chair scraped loud against the floor. His hand went to the Remington without thinking. Old habits. The kind the army drilled into you until they were deeper than bone. Jasper didn't move, didn't look away from whatever had his attention out in the dark. The wind was picking up harder now, bringing the smell of snow that hadn't fallen yet. That's when Silas heard it. Not a sound exactly. More like the absence of the sounds that should have been there. The night birds had gone quiet. The insects were done. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. Something was wrong out there in the dark, and Jasper knew it. The cat turned his head just enough to look at Silas through the glass. Their eyes met, held. In that moment, Silas could have sworn the animal was trying to tell him something, which was crazy. Animals didn't communicate like that, but the look was unmistakable. Something's coming. Be ready. Silas checked the Remington. His hands were shaking again. The snow started just after midnight, not the gentle kind that drifted down lazy and quiet. This came in hard and mean, driven sideways by wind that screamed through the valley like something wounded. Silas watched it from the window, the Remington still in his hand, though he'd forgotten he was holding it. Jasper hadn't moved from his spot on the porch. The bobcat sat rigid, facing north toward the deep timber where the old logging roads cut through. Every few minutes his tail would twitch, just the tip, the way it did before he pounced on something. But there was nothing out there. Nothing visible anyway. The storm built fast. Within an hour the wind was strong enough to shake the cabin walls, and the temperature had dropped 20 degrees. Silas added wood to the stove, checked the seals on the windows, did all the things you did when you were settling in for a long blow. He'd been through worse. Afghanistan had taught him that comfort was relative, and survival was just a matter of outlasting whatever wanted to kill you. Around 2 a.m, Jasper started making noise. Not the low growl he used when coyotes got too close. This was different, higher pitched, almost frantic. The cat was at the door now, clawing at the wood hard enough to leave marks. Silas had never seen him act like this. In 2 years, Jasper had been nothing but controlled. Predators didn't panic. That was the whole point of being a predator. Silas opened the door and the wind nearly tore it off its hinges. Snow blasted into the cabin, already piling up 3 inches on the porch. Jasper shot past him into the storm without hesitation, disappearing into the white in seconds. For a moment, Silas just stood there, feeling the cold burn his face, wondering if the cat had finally decided to leave for good. Then he heard it, faint, almost lost in the wind, but there. A sound that didn't belong to the storm. Silas grabbed his coat, pulled on boots, and followed Jasper's tracks before the snow could cover them. The bobcat's trail led north, straight toward the bad country where the ridge dropped off steep and mean. Nobody went up there, not even hunters. Too many sinkholes, too many hidden drops disguised by brush and deadfall. The old-timers said there were illegal bear traps scattered through those woods from back when poaching was the only way some folks ate. Silas had always figured that was just talk. He found Jasper about half a mile in, standing at the edge of something dark. The cat was making that sound again, that urgent cry that raised the hair on Silas's neck. When he got close enough to see what Jasper was looking at, his breath stopped. It was a pit. 8 feet deep, maybe more, the sides slick with ice and mud. And at the bottom, curled against the frozen earth, was a child. The girl couldn't have been more than 10. She was wearing a thin jacket that was soaked through, jeans that were torn at the knees, shoes that had no business being on a mountain in winter. Her lips were blue. Her skin was the color of old snow. But she was breathing. Barely. And she was holding something against her chest, clutching it with both arms like it was the only thing keeping her alive. Silas slid down into the pit without thinking. His bad knee buckled when he hit bottom, but he didn't feel it. The girl's eyes were closed. When he touched her neck to check for a pulse, her skin was so cold it burned his fingers. She was maybe an hour from dead. Maybe less. That's when he saw Jasper. The Bobcat had somehow gotten down into the pit too, though Silas hadn't seen him do it. And the cat wasn't standing guard or keeping his distance. He was curled around the girl, his body pressed tight against her back, his face tucked near her neck. The fur on his chest was damp. He'd been there for a while. Long enough to share what little body heat a 40-pound cat could give. The girl's fingers were locked around a wooden box. Oak, from the look of it. Old and weathered, with brass corners that had gone green with age. She wouldn't let go. Even unconscious, even dying, she held onto that box like it was worth more than her own life. Silas pulled off his coat and wrapped it around her, then lifted her as carefully as he could. She weighed nothing, just bones and cold skin and whatever was left of a heartbeat. Jasper scrambled up the side of the pit first, finding purchase where there shouldn't have been any, then looked back down at Silas with those green eyes that seemed to know things. The climb out was bad. The walls were slick and his knee screamed every time he put weight on it. But he got her up, got her into his arms, and started back toward the cabin. Jasper led the way, breaking trail through snow that was already knee-deep. The cat kept looking back, checking to make sure Silas was still coming, still following. Like he understood exactly what was happening. The wind tried to stop them. The cold tried to stop them. But Jasper kept moving forward, and Silas kept putting one foot in front of the other. And the girl in his arms kept breathing those shallow, fragile breaths that said she wasn't gone yet. When they finally reached the cabin, Silas kicked the door shut behind them and carried the girl to the bed. Only then did he notice his hands. They were shaking worse than they had in months. But this time, it wasn't the whiskey or the memories. This time, it was something else. This time, someone needed him to be steady. The girl's body temperature was 79 degrees. Silas knew, because he still had a thermometer in the medical kit he'd sworn he'd never open again. The kit sat in the closet under a pile of old blankets and lies he'd told himself about being done with that life. Now it was spread across the kitchen table next to the Remington, and his hands were shaking so badly he could barely thread the suture needle. Hypothermia wasn't the worst of it. Her left leg had a gash that ran from knee to ankle, deep enough that he could see muscle tissue underneath the dried blood. Infection had already started, the skin around the wound angry and hot despite how cold the rest of her was. She needed a hospital. She needed antibiotics he didn't have, and equipment he couldn't improvise. She needed someone who still knew how to do this without falling apart. But the nearest hospital was 40 miles down a mountain road that was already impassable, and even if he could get her there, it would raise questions. Questions about how she'd ended up in that pit, about who she was running from, about why a 10-year-old girl was alone in the mountains during a blizzard holding onto a wooden box like it was filled with secrets worth dying for. Silas looked at his hands. They'd been steady in Kandahar, steady in Kabul, steady through 43 surgeries performed in tents and bunkers while mortars fell close enough to shake the instruments on the tray. Now they trembled over a child who weighed 70 pounds and needed him to be what he used to be. The girl stirred, her eyes moving behind closed lids. She was dreaming, or remembering. Silas couldn't tell which. Her fingers were still locked around that box, even after he'd stripped off her wet clothes and wrapped her in every blanket the cabin had. Whatever was inside mattered more to her than warmth, more than safety. That kind of grip came from fear, the deep kind that lived in your bones long after the danger passed. He started with the wound cleaning. Cold water first, then the iodine he'd been saving for his own eventual stupidity. The girl's body jerked when the antiseptic hit raw tissue, but she didn't wake, didn't scream. That bothered Silas more than if she had. Kids were supposed to cry when they hurt. They were supposed to make noise. This one had learned to suffer quietly, which meant someone had taught her that making sound was dangerous. Jasper was at the window. The Bobcat had taken up position there as soon as they'd gotten back, his body low, his ears swiveling to catch sounds Silas couldn't hear. Every few minutes he'd look back at the girl, then return to his surveillance. It was the same behavior Silas had seen in military working dogs overseas, the ones trained to detect threats before humans could register them. But Jasper had never been trained. He was a wild animal who'd chosen to stay close, and right now he was acting like he understood that whatever had hurt this girl might come looking to finish the job. The stitching took an hour. 32 sutures, each one a small battle against muscle memory and bourbon shakes. Silas's back was soaked with sweat by the time he tied off the last knot. The work wasn't pretty. His hands had been out of practice too long, and the scar would be thick and ropey. But it would hold. That's all that mattered. The girl's fever spiked around dawn. She started talking in her sleep, fragments of sentences that didn't connect. She kept saying a name, Emma, over and over, like a prayer or an apology. Her body would go rigid every time the wind picked up outside, every time the cabin creaked under the weight of accumulated snow. The fear was in her, even unconscious, wound tight around her spine. Silas sat in the chair next to the bed and watched her breathe. He'd done this before. Sat vigil over broken bodies and waited to see if they'd make it through to morning. Some had, some hadn't. The ones who died usually did it quietly, just a change in the breathing pattern. A final exhale that never got answered by another inhale. You learn to listen for it. You learn to hear the difference between sleep and the thing that came after. Jasper jumped up onto the foot of the bed. Silas didn't stop him. The cat settled carefully, positioning himself so his weight rested against the girl's feet without putting pressure on her injured leg. His purr was low and steady, a vibration Silas could feel through the mattress. Some studies said that frequency helped with healing, something about cell regeneration and bone density. Silas had always thought that was feel-good nonsense. Now he wasn't so sure. The storm raged outside, piling snow against the north wall until the cabin felt buried. Inside, the only sounds were the fire crackling, the girl's labored breathing, and Jasper's steady rumble. Silas found himself counting her breaths. 22 per minute. Too fast, but not getting worse. That was something. Around noon, the girl's eyes opened. Not all the way, just slits, unfocused and glassy with fever. She looked at Silas without recognition, her pupils too wide for the dim light. Then she looked down at the box still clutched to her chest. Her fingers tightened on it. Even delirious, even barely conscious, she knew that box was important. Silas leaned forward. "You're safe," he said. The words felt like a lie even as he spoke them. Nothing about this was safe. But sometimes, lies were kinder than the truth. The girl's mouth moved. No sound came out at first, just her lips forming shapes. Then, barely audible, a whisper that might have been a word, or might have been just air escaping damaged lungs. Silas leaned closer. "Don't let them find it," she said. Her hand moved from the box to Silas's wrist, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so close to broken. "Please." Then her eyes rolled back, and she was gone again, lost to whatever nightmares were chasing her through the dark. Jasper's ears flattened against his skull. He was staring at the window again, his body gone tense. Outside, through the driving snow, something moved. Silas saw it for just a second. A shape, too big to be a deer, too deliberate to be random. Someone was out there, and Jasper knew it. The knock came 2 hours later. 3 hard raps that echoed through the cabin like gunshots. Silas was at the stove, trying to get some broth heated for the girl, and the sound made him drop the ladle. Jasper was off the bed instantly, vanishing into the shadows beneath it with the kind of speed that reminded you he was a predator first and everything else second. Nobody came up here. Not in winter. Not during a storm. The logging road was barely passable in good weather, and right now it was under 3 feet of snow with more coming down. Whoever was outside had either come prepared or was stupid enough not to care. Silas checked the Remington, made sure there was a round chambered, then moved it behind the door where he could reach it fast. Years in the service had taught him that friendly visitors didn't usually show up unannounced in the middle of nowhere. He pulled the blanket over the girl, checked to make sure the medical supplies were out of sight, then opened the door just wide enough to see out. Sheriff Bill Miller stood on the porch, snow piling up on his shoulders like he'd been standing there for a while. Behind him was a younger man Silas didn't recognize, maybe 30 years old, with the kind of lean build that said he spent more time moving than sitting. The deputy had eyes that didn't blink enough, the kind of stare that felt predatory even when it was aimed at nothing in particular. Miller grinned when he saw Silas. "Hell, Thorne, you look like you've seen a ghost. It's just me." He stamped snow off his boots, an invitation to be let inside that Silas didn't want to accept, but couldn't refuse without raising questions. "Storm's getting worse," Silas said, not moving from the doorway. "Long way to come just to check on a hermit?" "Yeah, well." Miller's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Haven't seen you in town for a while. People worry, you know how it is." He gestured to the man behind him. "This is Cody, new deputy," showing him the territory. Cody nodded, but didn't speak. His eyes were already moving past Silas, scanning the inside of the cabin with the kind of thoroughness that made Silas's jaw tighten. This wasn't a social call. Miller might be pretending it was, but Cody wasn't even bothering with the act. Silas stepped back and let them in because turning them away would be worse. Miller had been decent once, back before the war, back when they used to fish the same streams and drink at the same bar. But that was a long time ago, and the man who walked into the cabin now had the smell of something gone wrong clinging to him like smoke. "Coffee?" Silas offered. Because that's what you did when someone showed up at your door, even if you didn't want them there. "That'd be good." Miller settled into a chair without being asked, his eyes taking in the cabin the same way Cody's had. Looking for something. Silas could see it in the way his gaze lingered on the closed bedroom door, on the medical kit that Silas hadn't quite managed to put away completely. From under the bed, Jasper made a sound. Low, barely audible, but enough that Cody's hand moved toward his hip where his service weapon sat. The deputy's eyes found the darkness beneath the bed frame, and something in his expression shifted. Recognition, maybe, or anticipation. "That your cat?" Cody asked. His voice had gravel in it, the kind that came from smoking or yelling or both. "Bobcat," Silas corrected. "Wild. Just tolerates me for the shelter. Dangerous animal to keep around." Cody hadn't taken his eyes off the space under the bed. "Could hurt someone." "Could," Silas agreed. "Hasn't yet." Miller laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Cody here's a dog man. Doesn't trust cats. Any kind." He accepted the coffee Silas handed him, took a sip, then set it down like he'd lost interest. "Listen, Silas, I'll be straight with you. We're looking for something, or someone. Young girl, maybe 10 years old. Went missing from her foster home down in Asheville 3 days ago." The lie was smooth, practiced. Miller had the face of someone who'd told this story before and expected to be believed. But Silas had spent enough time reading people in triage situations to know when someone was feeding him a line. The foster home detail was too specific. The timeline was too convenient. And Miller's eyes were watching for Silas's reaction with too much focus. "Haven't seen anyone," Silas said. "Been snowed in since yesterday." "That so?" Cody stood up, started moving around the cabin like he owned it. His hand trailed along the kitchen counter, touched the back of the other chair, moved toward the bedroom door. Storm came in fast. Could have gotten lost up here. Could have needed shelter. Jasper's growl was louder this time. Not a warning anymore. A threat. The sound came from somewhere deeper than his throat, vibrating through the floorboards. Cody stopped moving. His hand was on his weapon now, no pretense about it. "That animal sounds aggressive," Cody said, his eyes locked on the shadows. "Might need to be put down before it hurts someone." "He's fine," Silas said, putting himself between Cody and the bed. "Just doesn't like strangers. Can't blame him for that." Miller stood up, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "The thing is, Silas, this girl we're looking for, she took something when she left. Something valuable. Something that belongs to people who want it back." He moved closer, close enough that Silas could smell the tobacco on his breath. "Now, I know you keep to yourself up here. I respect that. But if you've seen anything, heard anything, it'd be better for everyone if you spoke up now." The bedroom door was 10 feet away. The girl was behind it, unconscious and defenseless. The wooden box was with her, and Miller was looking at Silas with eyes that said he already knew the answer to every question he was asking. "I haven't seen any girl," Silas repeated. His hand was behind his back now, fingers touching the doorframe, close to where the Remington waited. Storms made it hard to see much of anything. Cody moved toward the bedroom door. Jasper came out from under the bed like a released spring, landing between Cody and his target. The Bobcat's back was arched, his fur standing on end, making him look twice his actual size. The sound coming from his throat wasn't a growl anymore. It was the noise an animal made right before it attacked. "Jesus Christ," Cody breathed, his gun halfway out of its holster. "Don't." Silas's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "He'll back down if you don't push him. But if you draw that weapon, he'll take it as a threat." Miller held up a hand. "Easy, Cody. Let's not shoot the man's pet." He looked at Silas, and something passed between them, an understanding. an acknowledgement of what they both knew was happening here. We should get going. Storm's getting worse, and we've got other places to check. Appreciate you stopping by, Silas said, not moving from his position. Miller headed for the door, but Cody stayed where he was, staring at Jasper with the kind of focus that said he was memorizing details. Remembering, planning. We'll be back, Cody said. It wasn't a promise. It was a fact. Silas waited until the sound of Miller's truck faded down the mountain before he moved. Even then, he stood at the window for another 10 minutes, watching the tree line, making sure they were really gone. Jasper sat beside him, still tense, his ears tracking sounds that Silas's human hearing couldn't catch. The Bobcat knew what Silas knew. They'd be back. Maybe not today, but soon. The girl hadn't stirred during the whole encounter. That was probably for the best. If she'd made a sound, if Cody had heard her, things would have gone different. Silas didn't let himself think about how different. Some possibilities were better left unexamined. He went to the bedroom and looked at her lying there, small and broken under blankets that seemed too heavy for her thin frame. The wooden box was still clutched against her chest, her fingers white-knuckled around it, even in sleep. Silas had seen soldiers hold onto things like that. Letters from home, photos of people they'd never see again, talismans against the dark. Whatever was in that box mattered enough that this child had nearly died protecting it. Silas knelt beside the bed. His knee protested, the old shrapnel wound sending bolts of pain up his thigh. But he ignored it. Pain was just information. It told you that you were still alive, still capable of feeling something. He'd learned to be grateful for that, even when it hurt. I need to see what's inside, he said quietly, even though she couldn't hear him. I need to know what they're looking for. Her fingers didn't loosen. Even unconscious, she held on. Silas had to work each finger free carefully, one at a time, talking to her in a low voice the whole time. It's okay. I'm not taking it. Just need to look, just need to understand. He didn't know if the words mattered, but they felt necessary. Like making a promise to someone who couldn't hold him to it. The box was heavier than it looked. Oak, like he'd thought, old enough that the wood had darkened almost to black. The brass corners were corroded, but the lock mechanism was newer. Someone had retrofitted it recently. That was interesting. You didn't put a new lock on an old box unless you were trying to keep something specific secure. Silas had picked locks before. Field medicine sometimes required getting into supply caches that had been locked for safety. And the Army didn't always have time for proper requisition forms when soldiers were bleeding out. His hands shook as he worked, but muscle memory took over. 2 minutes and the lock clicked open. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were things that made Silas's stomach turn cold. Film canisters, 5 of them, the old kind that held 35mm negatives. Someone had labeled them with dates and locations. Riverside Industrial Park, Morton Chemical Plant, Easton Water Treatment Facility. The dates went back 18 months. Beneath the canisters was a stack of papers, some of them medical records with names and addresses, others that looked like internal company memos. And underneath all of it, a ledger, handwritten, meticulous. Names and dates and causes of death: leukemia, pancreatic cancer, brain tumors, respiratory failure. The list went on for pages. 47 names. 47 people who'd lived within 5 miles of those industrial sites. 47 deaths in 3 years, in towns that should have seen maybe 5 or 6 cases total. Silas had seen enough war crimes to recognize a cover-up when he was holding the evidence in his hands. This wasn't corporate negligence. This was systematic. Someone had been dumping chemical waste, poisoning groundwater, killing people slowly, and then burying the proof. The film canisters probably held photos of the dumping sites. The medical records proved the connection. And the ledger was a murder list, written in careful, damning detail. At the bottom of the box was a single photograph. Recent. A family. Man, woman, 2 girls. The woman was holding the younger girl's hand. The older girl was maybe 12, standing separate, her expression serious. Someone had drawn a red X over the man and woman. Another X over the younger girl. Only the older girl's face was unmarked. Silas looked at the girl in the bed. Same serious expression. Same dark hair. She was the survivor, the last witness, the only one left who knew where this box was and what it meant. Miller wasn't looking for a runaway. He was looking for evidence. And he was willing to kill a child to make sure it stayed buried. The implications hit Silas like a punch to the chest. Miller wasn't just corrupt. He was part of it. Maybe he'd been paid to look the other way. Maybe he'd helped with a cover-up. Either way, he couldn't let this box surface. Couldn't let anyone know what was on those film negatives or in that ledger. The girl was the last loose end, and Miller was here to tie it off. Silas's hands weren't shaking anymore. Something had settled in him. Something cold and familiar. The thing that had kept him functional in Kandahar when the casualties kept coming and the supplies ran out. The part of him that could look at impossible situations and find the one path through that didn't end in everyone dying. He carefully rewrapped everything and closed the box, then placed it back against the girl's chest. Her fingers found it immediately, curling around it even before she was fully conscious. Some instincts ran deeper than thought. Her eyes opened. Not the glassy, fevered look from before. This time she was present, aware. She looked at Silas for a long moment, and he could see her trying to figure out if he was safe. If this place was safe. If anything would ever be safe again. "Your name's Lily," Silas said. It wasn't a question. He'd seen it in the medical records. Lily Chen, 10 years old. Parents David and Susan Chen. Sister Emma Chen, age 7. All deceased. Accidental carbon monoxide poisoning, according to the official report. But the handwritten note in the margin of the ledger told a different story. Made to look like accident. Furnace tampering. Lily's eyes filled with tears. Not the crying kind. The kind that came from recognizing that someone finally knew. Finally understood. She tried to speak, but her throat was too raw, damaged from screaming or cold or both. Instead, she reached out to her and took Silas's hand. Her grip was weak but deliberate. A drowning person grabbing onto something solid. Silas squeezed back gently. "I know what's in the box," he said. "I know what they did, and I know they're coming back for it." He paused, made sure she was following. "But they're not going to get it, and they're not going to get you. I promise." It was a stupid promise. The kind you shouldn't make when you didn't know if you could keep it. But Lily needed to hear it, and Silas needed to say it. Some promises were worth making even when the odds said you'd fail. Lily's fingers tightened on his. Her mouth moved, forming words that took effort to push out. "Emma," she whispered. "They killed Emma." "I know," Silas said. "I'm sorry." Outside, the storm was still raging. But inside, something had shifted. Silas wasn't alone anymore, and neither was Lily. They had each other, and they had Jasper, and they had a box full of evidence that could bring down whoever had done this. All they had to do was survive long enough to get it to someone who could use it. They came back at dusk. Silas heard the engine while it was still a mile out. The low rumble cutting through the wind in a way that made Jasper's ears go flat. The Bobcat had been restless all afternoon. pacing between the window and the bed where Lily lay, his instincts reading something in the air that Silas could only guess at. Now those instincts were proven right. Silas moved fast. He helped Lily into the crawl space above the bedroom, a narrow gap between ceiling and roof that he'd insulated years ago, but never used. She could barely stand, her injured leg dragging, but fear gave her enough strength to climb the ladder he pulled down. The box went with her. Silas handed it up and watched her clutch it to her chest before he closed the hatch and pushed the ladder back into place. "Don't make a sound," he whispered through the boards. "No matter what you hear." The truck stopped outside. Doors opened. More than 2 this time. Silas counted footsteps. 3 men, maybe 4. And something else? A sound he recognized from his time overseas. The panting of a working dog, heavy, aggressive, the kind trained to find and hold. Miller didn't bother knocking this time. He kicked the door open hard enough to crack the frame, standing in the threshold with Cody beside him and 2 other men Silas didn't recognize. Between them, straining at a thick leather lead, was a Doberman that had to weigh 90 pounds. The dog's eyes were locked on the cabin interior, its body vibrating with controlled violence. "Got ourselves a warrant, Silas." Miller held up a piece of paper that might have been official or might have been something he'd printed an hour ago. It didn't matter. The law had stopped applying the moment that box fell into Miller's jurisdiction. "Need to search the premises. You can cooperate, or we can make this difficult." "Place is small," Silas said, letting his voice shake a little. "Not hard to do. Not much to search. Just me and my cat. That's what we're here to verify." Miller nodded to one of the men, who released the Doberman's lead. The dog surged forward immediately, nose to the ground, working in tight patterns across the floor. It was trained for this. Trained to find people hiding. Trained to alert on blood and fear and the specific scent markers that humans left when they were trying to disappear. Jasper appeared from behind the stove. The Bobcat had waited until the dog was fully committed, fully inside the cabin and away from its handlers. Then he moved into view deliberately, making himself visible. The Doberman's head snapped up, every muscle in its body going rigid. What happened next happened fast. The Doberman lunged, 90 pounds of trained aggression launching itself at what it thought was prey. But Jasper was already moving, racing toward the bedroom with the dog right behind him. The Bobcat leaped onto the dresser, then to the top of the doorframe, then disappeared into the darkness of the open attic access that Silas had left exposed on purpose. The Doberman followed without thinking, driven by instinct and training to pursue. It crashed into the bedroom, claws scrabbling on wood as it tried to follow Jasper's path upward. The dog was too heavy, too clumsy. It fell back, then tried again, barking now, a sharp, rapid sound that filled the small space with noise. Silas had seconds, while Miller and his men were focused on the bedroom, on the chaos of dog versus cat. He grabbed the medical kit from the table and shoved it into the cold stove where the ashes would hide it. His hands moved on muscle memory, the kind of quick cleanup he'd done 100 times in field hospitals when inspections came through. "The hell is your cat doing?" Miller was in the bedroom now, looking up at where Jasper had vanished into the rafters. The dog was going crazy, jumping and barking and generally being useless for anything except making noise. "He's wild," Silas said, shuffling into the room like his knee hurt worse than it did. "Gets spooked by dogs, probably hiding up in the rafters." He made his voice querulous, old. The kind of tone that suggested a man who couldn't be a threat even if he wanted to be. "Can you call your dog off? It's tearing up my floor." Cody was the one who noticed. He'd been hanging back, watching, his eyes scanning the room with the kind of attention that missed nothing. Now he knelt down near the bed, his finger touching something on the floorboards. When he stood up, his fingertip was red. "Blood," he said. "Fresh." The temperature in the room dropped. Miller's expression changed from irritated to focused. The Doberman was still barking, still trying to reach Jasper in the rafters, but Cody grabbed its collar and forced it quiet. In the sudden silence, everyone could hear it. The slight creak of wood above their heads, weight shifting, someone trying very hard to be still and not quite managing it. "That's a lot of blood for a man who lives alone," Miller said quietly. His hand moved to his hip where his weapon sat. "Want to explain that, Silas?" Silas's mind raced. The blood was from Lily's leg, from where he'd done the stitching. Drops must have fallen when he was carrying her. He'd been too focused on getting her hidden to notice. Stupid. Careless. The kind of mistake that got people killed. "Cut myself fixing the stove," Silas said. The lie was thin, and they all knew it. Happens when you're old and your hands shake. Cody was already moving toward the crawlspace hatch. His eyes had found it, traced the outline of the access panel that Silas had tried to make invisible. Miller followed his gaze and smiled. Not a friendly expression, the kind of smile that said he'd found what he was looking for. "Cody," Miller said, "check the attic." Cody was halfway up the ladder when the oil lamp fell. Nobody saw exactly how it happened. One moment it was sitting on the dresser where it had been for years, flame burning steady. The next it was on the floor, glass shattering, kerosene spreading in a bright pool that caught fire instantly. The flames climbed the wall with hungry speed, finding purchase on old wood that had spent decades drying out in mountain air. Cody jumped down cursing, beating at his pant leg where flames had caught. The Doberman started barking again, panicked now instead of aggressive. The smoke was immediate and thick, pouring from the burning wall into the small bedroom until breathing became guesswork. In the chaos, nobody noticed Jasper dropping from the rafters and disappearing into the main room. Miller grabbed Silas by the collar. "Where is she?" His voice was raw, desperate. The careful facade was gone. This was a man watching his world collapse in real time, and he was willing to burn it all down rather than face what would happen if that box survived. "The girl, where'd you put her?" Silas didn't answer. Couldn't answer, even if he'd wanted to. Miller's grip was cutting off his air, and the smoke was making everything hazy and distant. Through the growing inferno, he could see Lily dropping from the crawl space, landing hard on her injured leg, the box still clutched against her chest. She was coughing, trying to crawl toward the door through smoke that was getting thicker by the second. Cody saw her too. He drew his weapon, the movement smooth and practiced. This was it. The moment where they stopped pretending this was about law enforcement and admitted it was about murder. Miller would kill Silas. Cody would kill the girl. They'd burn the cabin with both bodies inside and claim they'd gotten there too late to save anyone from the fire. Clean, simple. The kind of cover-up that had probably worked for them before. But Cody never got the shot off. Jasper hit him from the side. 40 pounds of muscle and fury driving into the deputy's ribs, hard enough to lift him off his feet. They went down together, the gun skittering across the floor into the flames. The Bobcat's claws were out, shredding through fabric and skin, finding the soft spots that would bleed fastest. Cody was screaming, trying to protect his face, his throat, the vital places where an animal this size could kill if it wanted to. Miller let go of Silas' arm and reached for his own weapon. But Silas was faster. Years of combat training kicked in, overriding the alcohol shakes and the PTSD, and every reason his body had to be slow. He grabbed the nearest thing available, a bourbon bottle sitting on the nightstand, and smashed it against the dresser. The glass broke clean, leaving him with a handle and 6 inches of jagged edges that caught the firelight like teeth. Miller got his gun out, started to bring it up. Silas didn't give him time to aim. He drove forward, inside Miller's guard, and slammed the broken bottle into the sheriff's gun hand. Glass cut deep, opening arteries. Blood sprayed across the wall, black in the firelight. Miller's weapon dropped, and then they were grappling, 2 men fighting for their lives in a room that was rapidly becoming uninhabitable. The heat was incredible. The smoke was worse. Silas could feel his lungs burning with every breath, could feel his eyes watering until he was fighting blind. Miller was bigger, younger, not carrying old injuries that made every movement cost extra. But Silas had something Miller didn't. He'd been here before, had fought in burning buildings in Fallujah, in collapsed bunkers in Kandahar, had learned that survival wasn't about being stronger or faster. It was about being willing to do whatever it took for 1 more second of life. He got behind Miller, got an arm around his throat, and squeezed. Not a clean choke, nothing pretty about it. Just brutal pressure on the carotid until Miller's struggles got weaker, until the bigger man's knees started to buckle. Silas held on even when Miller clawed at his arm, even when the heat got so bad his skin was blistering. Lily was at the door, Jasper beside her. The cat was bleeding from a dozen places where the Doberman had gotten its teeth in, but he was still standing, still guarding the girl. The dog itself was on the floor, motionless. Whether dead or unconscious, Silas couldn't tell and didn't care. Cody was trying to get up, his face a mask of blood from where Jasper had opened his cheek to the bone. He saw his gun in the flames and made a decision. Started crawling toward it, reaching into fire to grab the weapon even as the heat melted the skin on his palm. Miller went limp. Silas dropped him and staggered toward Lily. Every breath a battle, every step a negotiation with a body that wanted to quit. He grabbed her hand, pulled her toward the main room where the smoke was slightly less thick. Behind them, the bedroom was completely engulfed, the walls sheeting flame from floor to ceiling. They made it to the front door. Fresh air hit Silas like a physical blow, so cold it hurt worse than the heat had. He pulled Lily outside, into snow that was still falling, still accumulating. Jasper followed, limping now, leaving red prints in the white. Behind them, the cabin started to collapse. The roof over the bedroom went first, timbers cracking and falling inward. Then the walls. The whole structure folding in on itself like it had been waiting years for permission to finally fall down. Somewhere in that inferno, Miller and Cody were either dead or dying. The Doberman too. And all the evidence they'd thought they could destroy was burning to ash. Except for the box. Lily still had the box. And that changed everything. Silas looked at the girl, at Jasper, at the burning wreckage of the only home he'd had for 5 years. Then he looked north, toward the deep country, toward the mountain passes that would be hell to cross in this weather, but might be the only route that kept them alive long enough to matter. "We have to go," he said. His voice was raw from smoke, barely recognizable. "Right now. Can you walk?" Lily nodded. She was crying, silent tears cutting tracks through the soot on her face. But she was standing, still holding that box, still refusing to let go. "Then let's move." The forest swallowed them whole. Within 50 yards, the burning cabin was just a dull orange glow through the trees, and within 100 yards, it was gone completely. There was only snow and darkness, and the sound of their own breathing cutting through frozen air. Silas kept them moving north. It was the only direction that made sense. South led back toward roads, toward civilization, toward places where Miller's people could intercept them. East and west were logging territory, too open, too exposed. But north was the Dead Rock Range, a stretch of backcountry so brutal that even experienced hikers avoided it. If they could make it over the ridge, there was a fire lookout tower on the far side. Federal land, federal rangers, people who might actually help instead of trying to kill them. That was the theory anyway. The reality was they had maybe 6 hours of darkness left, no food, no shelter, and injuries that would slow them to a crawl. Lily was limping badly, her stitches probably torn from the fall out of the crawl space. Jasper was worse. The Bobcat's left front leg wasn't taking weight properly, and blood kept seeping through his fur from the wounds the Doberman had inflicted. He was moving on stubbornness and adrenaline, both of which had limits. Silas wasn't much better. His hands were blistered from the fire, his lungs felt like someone had scoured them with steel wool, and his bad knee was sending sharp signals up his spine that said it was done cooperating. But he was still moving, still putting one foot in front of the other, because that's what you did when the alternative was dying in the snow. They'd been walking for maybe an hour when Lily fell. Not a stumble, a full collapse, her leg just giving out underneath her. Silas caught her before she hit the ground completely, felt how light she was, how little strength she had left. The fever was back. He could feel it radiating through her clothes. Infection from the leg wound, probably. Racing through her system while they ran through the woods like it was somehow possible to outrun biology. "I can't," she whispered. Her teeth were chattering so hard she could barely form words. "I'm sorry, I can't." Silas knelt in the snow beside her, ignoring the way his niece screamed. "Yes, you can. Just a little further. Just to that ridge line." He pointed ahead where the trees thinned out, though in the dark and snow it was mostly guesswork. "We'll rest there. I promise." It was a lie. They couldn't rest. Not for long. Miller might be dead, but Cody could have survived. And even if they were both gone, someone would find the burned cabin eventually. Would put together what had happened. Would send more people to finish what Miller started. The box Lily carried was worth too much to too many powerful people. They'd keep coming until it was buried, or until everyone who knew about it was dead. Jasper was watching the trees behind them. His ears were forward, tracking something. Silas heard it a moment later. Voices, faint, coming from the direction they'd fled. Someone was following them, using flashlights that cut through the storm in thin white beams. Miller had survived. Or Cody had. Or both. And they were coming. Silas pulled Lily to her feet. "We have to move, now." He half carried, half dragged her forward, trying to go faster, knowing faster wasn't possible. Behind them, the voices got louder. The beams got brighter. Whoever was back there was gaining ground. The ridgeline was steeper than it looked. What seemed like a gentle slope from a distance turned into a near vertical climb once they got close. Silas went first, finding handholds in frozen rock, pulling himself up inches at a time. Then he reached down for Lily, hauling her up behind him. She was crying again, silent tears that froze on her cheeks. But she kept climbing. Jasper couldn't make it. The Bobcat tried, got maybe 10 feet up, then slipped and fell back. He landed badly, his injured leg collapsing completely. When he tried to stand again, he couldn't. Just sat there in the snow, looking up at Silas with eyes that held understanding. The cat knew what was happening, knew he was done. Lily was halfway up the rock face, clinging to an outcrop with shaking hands. The voices behind them were close now, maybe 200 yards, maybe less. Silas could see the flashlight beams sweeping through the trees, searching. He looked at Jasper, then at Lily, then back at Jasper. The math was simple. If he went back for the cat, they'd both die. The climb was hard enough without carrying extra weight, and Jasper was 40 pounds of struggling animal who didn't understand they were trying to help him. But if he left the cat, if he just kept climbing and let Jasper face whatever was coming alone, they might make it, might survive. Jasper made the decision for him. The bobcat stood up on 3 legs, turned toward the approaching voices, and lowered his body into a crouch. Not running, not hiding, standing his ground, buying them time the only way he could. "No," Silas said. His voice broke on the word. "Jasper, no." But the cat didn't look back. He just waited there in the snow, positioned between the hunters and the hunted, making himself the target so they wouldn't be. It was the same thing he'd done in the cabin. The same thing he'd done in the pit when he'd used his body heat to keep Lily alive. Jasper had chosen them, had decided they were worth protecting. And now he was making one final choice. Silas wanted to climb back down, wanted to grab the cat and force him to come. But Lily was crying out, losing her grip on the rock, about to fall, and the voices were getting closer, and there wasn't time for wants. "I'm sorry," Silas whispered. Then he turned away and kept climbing. They made it over the ridge just as the first gunshot echoed through the valley. Silas didn't let himself think about what that sound meant. Couldn't afford to. Lily was barely conscious, her weight heavy against his shoulder as he half carried her down the far slope toward a cluster of granite outcrops that offered some cover. Behind them, maybe 300 yards back, the pursuers were still coming. It was Cody. Just Cody. Silas had caught a glimpse through the trees during the climb, seen the deputy's bloody face illuminated by his flashlight. Miller was either dead or too injured to follow. That should have been good news, but Cody alone was still more than enough to finish them. The man had youth and weapons, and the kind of focused rage that came from surviving something that should have killed you. Silas laid Lily behind a boulder, checked to make sure she was breathing. Her eyes were closed, her lips blue again. Going into shock, probably. Or hypothermia, or both. The box was still clutched to her chest, her fingers frozen in position. He tried to pry them loose, to take the weight away, but even unconscious, she held on. The granite slope was treacherous. Good for defense if you knew what you were doing. Silas had done this before, set up ambush points in mountain terrain in Afghanistan. The principles were the same regardless of location. Control the high ground. Force your enemy into kill zones. Use the terrain as a weapon when you didn't have better options. He worked fast, his burned hands screaming as he gathered materials. Dead branches, loose rocks, his belt, the knife he'd grabbed from the cabin before they fled. It wasn't much, but field medicine had taught him that you didn't need fancy equipment to save a life. Sometimes, improvisation worked better than proper tools. Same principle applied to killing. The tripwire went across the narrow path between 2 outcrops. Simple. Ancient. The kind of trap humans had been setting since before they learned to make fire. A branch bent back under tension, rocks balanced on top, ready to fall. Anyone coming through fast would trigger it. The falling rocks wouldn't kill them, but they'd hurt enough to slow them down, make them cautious about what else might be waiting. The second trap was crueler. A pit, shallow, covered with branches and snow. At the bottom, sharpened sticks pointing upward. Punji stakes. Vietnam era. Brutal and effective. Silas had seen what they did to people in field hospitals overseas, had spent hours extracting them from legs and feet and places where the screaming never really stopped. He'd sworn he'd never make them himself. Necessity had a way of changing what you were willing to do. He heard Cody coming before he saw him. The deputy was making noise, crashing through brush, no longer trying to be quiet. Rage had replaced tactics. This was personal now. Cody had been mauled by a bobcat, burned in a fire, and forced to chase two people through a blizzard in the middle of the night. He wasn't thinking about being careful anymore. He was thinking about revenge. The tripwire caught him at ankle height. The branch released. Rocks fell. Not many. Not enough. Cody stumbled but didn't go down, just cursed and raised his flashlight, searching for targets. His gun was out. A Glock, standard issue. 15 rounds if he'd kept it loaded right. That's when Jasper hit him from the side. The bobcat came out of the darkness like a launched missile, all claws and teeth and fury. He shouldn't have been able to move. Shouldn't have been able to climb. That injured leg should have made him useless. But Jasper had followed them anyway, had dragged himself up that rock face through sheer force of will. And now he was using the last of his strength to do what he'd been doing since the moment he found Lily in that pit. Protect. Cody went down hard, the cat on top of him, tearing at his face and hands. The deputy was screaming, trying to bring his weapon up. But Jasper was inside his guard, too close for the gun to matter. They rolled, locked together, toward the edge of the slope where the ground dropped away into fog and darkness. Silas ran toward them, knowing he'd never make it in time. Cody got his hand on Jasper's throat, squeezing. The cat's struggles got weaker, but Jasper's back legs were still moving, still kicking, still pushing them both toward the edge. They went over together. One moment they were there, fighting, desperate. The next they were gone, swallowed by fog. Silas heard the impact. Once, twice. Then silence that felt louder than any scream. He stood at the edge, looking down into nothing. The drop was maybe 70 feet, maybe more. The fog made it impossible to tell. No one was climbing back up from that. Not Cody, not Jasper. The silence lasted for maybe 30 seconds. Then Silas heard it. Breathing, heavy, pained, coming from further up the slope. Miller. The sheriff had made it after all. Must have been trailing Cody by a few minutes. And now he was here, gun drawn, standing between Silas and where Lily lay unconscious. Miller looked bad. Burn marks on his face. Blood soaked through his shirt from where Silas had cut his hand. But he was upright and armed, and close enough that missing would be difficult. "It's done," Miller said. His voice was rough, damaged from smoke. "Give me the box and I'll let you walk away. The girl too. My word on it." "Your word doesn't mean much," Silas said. He was calculating distances, angles, possibilities. All of them bad. "Maybe not, but you're out of options." Miller moved closer, the gun steady despite his injuries. "I didn't want this. Any of it. The dumping, the cover-up, none of it was my idea. I was just doing what I was told. Keeping things quiet, making problems disappear." 47 problems, Silas said. 47 people you helped murder." Miller flinched. "I didn't kill them. The chemicals did that. I just made sure nobody looked too close at why so many people in one county were getting sick." He was close now. 10 feet. Maybe less. "You understand duty, Thorne. Following orders. Doing what needs to be done, even when it costs you. We're the same, you and me. We're nothing alike. No?" Miller's smile was ugly. "How many people did you lose over there? How many of those 11 kids died because you weren't fast enough, weren't good enough? You think their families cared that you tried? You think it matters?" Silas felt something crack inside him. The guilt he'd been carrying for years, the weight of those 11 names, the memory of screaming and blood and desperate attempts to save people who were already gone. Miller was using it against him, using his own pain as a weapon. Lily's family, Silas said quietly. Tell me how they died. Miller's expression changed. What? Her parents, her sister Emma. Tell me how you killed them. Silas took a step forward. Miller's gun tracked him, but didn't fire. You made it look like an accident? Carbon monoxide. But you tampered with their furnace, didn't you? Killed them in their sleep because they knew too much. They should have kept quiet, Miller said. His voice was defensive now, breaking. Should have taken the money and moved away like I told them to. But they wanted justice, wanted to expose everything. They didn't understand what that would cost. So you murdered a 7-year-old girl. Another step. You killed a child to protect your secret. I didn't have a choice. Miller was shouting now. They would have ruined everything. The company, the jobs, the whole town's economy. All of it gone because 2 people couldn't let it go. You had a choice, Silas said. You always have a choice. And you chose to kill children. One more step. He was close enough now. Close enough to see Miller's hands shaking. Close enough to see tears on the sheriff's burned face. Lily knows what you did. She has proof. And no matter what happens to me, that truth is coming out. You've already lost. Miller raised the gun, pointed it at Silas's chest. His finger tightened on the trigger. Behind him, Lily stood up. She'd been awake, listening, and in her hands was the largest rock she could lift. She brought it down on the back of Miller's head with every ounce of strength left in her small body. Miller dropped. The gun fired once, the round going wild, disappearing into the night. Then he was on his knees, then on his face, unmoving. Lily stood over him, the rock still in her hands, the box at her feet. She was crying. Not scared crying. Grief crying. The kind that came from watching the man who murdered your family finally get what he deserved. Silas went to her, took the rock gently from her hands, held her while she shook. Is he dead? She whispered. Silas checked, found a pulse. Weak, but there. No, but he will be if we leave him here. Lily looked at Miller, then at Silas. My family would want me to be better than him, she said finally. Emma would want that. Silas nodded. Then we'll take him with us. Let the law decide what happens to him. They zip-tied Miller's hands with a strip torn from his own jacket, then started moving again, toward the fire tower, toward help, toward whatever came next. Behind them, the fog began to clear. And at the bottom of the ravine, a small, dark shape pulled itself onto a ledge and began the long, slow climb toward dawn. The fire tower was 15 miles from where they'd left Miller. 15 miles that took them all night and into the gray hours before sunrise, when the world existed in that liminal space between dark and light. Silas carried Lily the last 5 miles, his body running on something that wasn't strength anymore. Just will. Just the stubborn refusal to let her die after they'd come this far. The ranger station was locked, but the emergency beacon wasn't. Silas triggered it at 4:47 in the morning, then sat down with his back against an old pine tree because his legs wouldn't hold him anymore. Lily curled against his chest, the box still clutched in her arms. She was breathing. That was all that mattered. The first helicopter arrived at dawn. Federal Rangers, like Silas had hoped. They came down fast, expecting to find hikers in distress, and instead found something that probably didn't make sense at first glance. An old man with burn marks and bloody hands. A child with a sutured leg, wound, and a fever. Both of them barely conscious, holding on to each other like letting go meant drowning. And 30 yards away, dragging himself through the snow one painful step at a time, a bobcat that should have been dead. Jasper had survived the fall. Somehow. Had pulled himself out of that ravine with a broken front leg and God knew what other injuries, and had followed them through the night. Following the scent trail they'd left. Following the pull of something deeper than instinct. The cat collapsed 10 feet from where Silas sat. Too exhausted to come closer, too stubborn to stop trying. The Rangers called for medical evacuation, called for backup, called for someone who could make sense of what they were seeing. While they worked, while they wrapped Lily in thermal blankets and started an IV line, Silas opened the wooden box one more time. He'd looked through it before, had cataloged the film canisters and the ledger and the medical records. But there was something he'd missed. Tucked into the bottom, beneath everything else, was a photograph. Old, creased, the kind that had been carried in a wallet for years before being transferred somewhere safer. The photo showed 2 men in desert camouflage, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning despite the heat and dust visible in the background. Somalia. Silas recognized the buildings behind them, the compound where they'd set up the field hospital. One of the men was Silas, 20 years younger, still believing he could save everyone if he just worked hard enough. The other man was David Chen. Silas's hands started shaking again. Not the bourbon shakes. Something worse. The kind of trembling that came from having the world reorganize itself in ways you weren't prepared for. David Chen had been one of the 11, had died on Silas's table during a mortar attack. His chest opened up, his heart visible and struggling and ultimately failing, despite everything Silas had tried. David had shown him this photo once, had talked about his wife Susan, who was pregnant with their second daughter, had made Silas promise that if something happened, if he didn't make it home, Silas would look out for his family. Tell them David died doing something that mattered. Silas had made that promise. Then he'd broken it, had gone home to the mountains and the whiskey and the isolation because he couldn't face the families of the men he'd lost. Couldn't stand to see Susan Chen and tell her that he'd failed to save her husband. Couldn't look at David's daughters and explain that their father had bled out while Silas's shaking hands tried and failed to clamp an artery that kept slipping away. Lily was David's daughter. The girl he'd been trying to save all night was the child of the man whose death had broken something fundamental in Silas's ability to function. The universe had a sense of irony that was almost cruel in its precision. One of the Rangers was examining the contents of the box. His expression changed as he looked through the film canisters, the ledger, the medical records. "This is evidence of major environmental crimes," he said into his radio. "We need EPA and FBI, multiple federal agencies. This is big." Lily stirred in the thermal blanket, opened her eyes, saw Silas looking at the photograph and understood immediately what he'd found. "You knew my dad," she said. Not a question. "I did." Silas's voice was rough. He was a good man. A great doctor. He saved more lives in Somalia than I could count. Did he die brave? Silas thought about lying, about giving her the sanitized version where David had gone out heroically instead of desperately. But Lily had earned the truth, had survived too much to be protected from reality now. "He died fighting," Silas said. "Fighting to stay alive. Fighting to get home to you and your mom and Emma. He didn't want to die. But he did it knowing he'd helped people, knowing he'd made a difference." Lily was crying again, quiet tears that ran down her face and disappeared into the blanket. "He wanted you to take care of us," she said. "That's why Mom had your name. That's why she knew to tell me about you before they killed her. She said if anything happened, if we ever needed help, there was a man in the mountains who owed us a debt." The words hit Silas like physical blows. Susan Chen had known where he was, had held on to that information for years, had given it to her daughter as a fail-safe, a last resort if everything went wrong. And Lily had used it. Had escaped with the box and headed into the mountains looking for a stranger she'd never met because her dying mother said he was someone who could be trusted. Silas had spent 5 years believing he owed the dead an apology. Turns out what he owed them was much simpler. He owed them the life he'd saved. The daughter who was still breathing because a drunk hermit and a wild bobcat had decided she was worth protecting. The Rangers were loading Lily onto a stretcher. One of them was on his radio calling for a veterinarian because apparently federal policy included evacuating injured wildlife when they were heroes. Jasper was being loaded onto a separate stretcher, too weak to protest, his eyes tracking Lily's movement. "He stays with me," Lily said. Her voice was stronger now. Certain. "Wherever I go, he goes." The ranger looked at Silas for confirmation. Silas nodded. "The cat stays with her. That's non-negotiable." They flew them out together. Lily and Jasper in one helicopter, Silas in another, because they needed to question him about Miller, about what had happened, about why there were bodies scattered across 10 miles of mountain wilderness. The story would come out. All of it. The dumping, the deaths, the cover-up. 47 names would finally get justice. 3 months later, Silas stood in a courtroom and testified about what he'd found in that wooden box. The film had been developed, the ledger analyzed, the medical records verified. Miller survived and was facing 47 counts of conspiracy to commit murder. The company executives were looking at federal environmental crimes. The whole thing was national news. Lily was there too, in the front row, wearing a dress that Susan Chen would have picked out. Next to her, in a specially built carrier that federal wildlife officials had somehow approved, was Jasper. The bobcat was healed now, his leg mended, his scars hidden under fur. He could have been released back to the wild, could have disappeared into the mountains and lived out his life the way nature intended. But Jasper had made his choice, had chosen Lily the moment he found her in that pit. And nothing that happened after changed what he'd decided. The cat stayed with her, followed her to school, to therapy sessions, to the foster home that had agreed to take them both. Became something the news media called the guardian of Blue Ridge, a symbol of loyalty and protection that people told stories about. Silas visited every Sunday. Sometimes they talked about the case, about justice for David and Susan and Emma. Sometimes they talked about normal things, about school and friends and what Lily wanted to be when she grew up. She was thinking about being a doctor, wanted to help people the way her father had, the way Silas had tried to. And slowly, over those months, Silas's hands stopped shaking. Not completely. The damage was too deep for that. But enough that he could hold a coffee cup steady. Enough that he could sign his name without the letters wandering off the line. Enough that when Lily asked him to teach her basic first aid, he could show her how to tie a tourniquet without his fingers betraying him. The debt to David Chen could never be fully repaid. Nothing would bring back the man who'd bled out in Somalia while Silas tried desperately to save him. But taking care of David's daughter, making sure she grew up safe and strong and capable of fighting for justice, that was something. That was enough. On a clear Sunday in spring, Silas took Lily and Jasper back to the mountains, to where the cabin had been. The burned wreckage was gone now, cleared away by park services. Just a scorched patch of earth and some blackened stones that showed where a foundation had been. They planted a tree there, a young pine, for David, for Susan, for Emma, for all 47 names in that ledger, for second chances and redemption and the strange grace that came from wild animals who chose to love broken people. Jasper sat guard while they worked, his eyes scanning the tree line out of habit, looking for threats that weren't there anymore. Lily patted his head when they finished, and the cat made that low, rumbling sound that wasn't quite a purr, but was close enough. Silas's hands were steady as he packed up the tools, steady as he helped Lily back to the truck, steady in a way they hadn't been for 5 years. The debt was paid, the dead could rest, and the living could finally start to heal. Sometimes the greatest bonds in life come from the most unexpected places. A broken man, a wild animal, and a child who refused to give up. Their story reminds us that redemption isn't always pretty, but it's always worth fighting for. What touched you most about Silas, Lily, and Jasper's journey? Was it the moment Jasper chose to protect Lily in that pit? The way Silas found his purpose again? Or maybe how Lily showed courage beyond her years? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, there are so many more like it waiting for you here. Stories of loyalty, second chances, and the bonds that heal us when we're most broken. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss another one. These stories matter. Your time here matters. And I'm grateful you spent it with us today. Take care of yourself, and remember, sometimes the family we need finds us in the most unexpected ways. Until next time.